Welcome back to the channel. Today we will travel through the pages of What If Issei Was Born with 4 Powers Part 4. The link to the story will be in the description below. Now let's start. Rias, Akeno and Kiba were understandably unnerved at Kaneko's warning. All 4 devils turned their attention to the club's door, waiting with bated breath for the brunette's arrival. Knowing that he made no sound when he moved made the situation all the more unnerving. When the door suddenly opened, their breaths were caught in their throats, their eyes were widened to the maximum, with the pupils dilated in terror, and the hairs on their skin stood stiffly. They stayed motionless on their seats, despite the terror they felt at the sheer bloodlust Issei's whole being emanated, even if there was no visible evidence of it. As if that wasn't enough, his facial expression almost made them have a heart attack. And, if Rias wasn't so stunned, she would have sent a distress signal straight to her brother. Issei's dark green eyes were half-lidded and his lips were set in a thin line. His whole demeanor screamed of an unnatural calmness that contradicted his bloodlust. After finally managing to somewhat regain themselves, the devils noticed something peculiar on his person that he had never had on him before, as far as they had seen. On his right hand, he held a 2-handed sword that seemed to be as long as one of his arms. Its sheath was a plain red, the handle was tied with a red ribbon and revealed 4 black diamonds on each side. The ribbon seemed to be very long, considering that it was coiled around his midsection many times. Its guard had 4 thin, dull gold prongs, pointing at 4 directions: north, south, east and west. Due to the shape of the sheath, they could see that the cutting edge was curved inwards, meaning that it wasn't a double-edged sword. This simple observation managed to snap them out of their terror. Apart from Kaneko. The girl focused her gaze on the coffee table in a vain attempt to calm down, as her instincts were running haywire. Ice-kun, I didn't know you had a sword of your own. Kiba found that as a solid distraction from his earlier terror, as his grey eyes were glued to said distraction, voicing his great interest at the sight of the sword with his perpetually kind, yet now shaky smile. It's a magic sword. The brunette replied evenly, his eyes locking with Aridide's blue ones, ignoring his friend's questioning, look for him to explain further. On a side note, it wasn't a complete lie that his sword was magical, but the devils didn't need to know that. Yet. Rias shuddered under his gaze, for reasons that eluded her, aside from the terror she was still feeling. Ice, we don't have clearance to raid the church, yet. She informed him professionally, surprising even herself that she didn't stutter. How long, then? The brunette basically demanded, not even a second after the Redide finished her sentence. Rias shifted awkwardly on her chair. She didn't know the answer to that question and didn't want to give any false information in case he got angry with her. We don't know, Ice-kun. It could be in a few minutes, or at Akeno, who came to the Redide's rescue, much to the Redide's relief, was cut off from her surprisingly calm explanation due to the long-awaited communication circle that appeared on her left ear, making all the devils sigh in relief. The brunette touched the circle to activate it and, while she was speaking telepathically with whoever was on the other side of the line, Rias and Kiba waited in anticipation. Kaneko found herself looking at Akeno in impatience as well. Issei, his demeanor not changing in the slightest, waited patiently as his eyes were locked on Akeno's concentrated ones. A few seconds later, the circle disappeared in a red flash, and Akeno's expression turned serious as she looked at Ria's almost impatient one. Rias Butchu, according to the Grigori, who relayed this to the Archduke, the entire group at the abandoned church is considered a rogue one. She summarized her small conversation. Rias briefly glanced at Issei in contemplation before she returned her now serious gaze at her best friend and queen. What about Raynare and the nun, Asia Argento? She asked, hoping that the answer wouldn't agitate the Securitate any further. They didn't specify. Was Akeno's short answer. Rias took a thoughtful look on her face as she locked gazes with the brunette. The tension in the room grew tenfold at the duo's stare-off, with Kiba and Akeno exchanging worried glances and Kaneko trembling on her seat. Rias-san, as I have already told you, I'll go regardless if you and your peerage go too or not. Issei reminded them in an even tone. Frankly, I don't need your help. But, in case you come as well, decide in the next few seconds. I won't wait any longer. He added, his voice sounding a little stronger, in order to prove his point. None of the devils liked the fact that they were dismissed like mere afterthoughts, but didn't comment on it. Fine. Rias relented with a sigh as she stood up from her desk with a focused expression, prompting Kiba and Kaneko to stand up as they looked at her. Me and my peerage will go there via teleportation. She said as she made her way to the left of the room in an elegant yet professional manner, her entourage following her. Okay. Issei responded evenly as he walked towards the window, confusing the devils. I'll meet you there. He added as he jumped outside, not waiting to hear their response. Rias sighed in annoyance as, with a flick of her fingers, she activated the teleportation circle. Not even a second later, they were enveloped in a crimson light before they vanished from the orc. Had they paid any attention to one another, they would have seen Kaneko widened in shock as she stared at Issei's general direction. After all, the girl was shocked that the brunette vanished from her senses once he disappeared from their view, which scared her to the core. If Issei wasn't contracted to Rias, Kaneko would have advised her king against going to that church, regardless of the Archduke's orders, consequences be damned. The devils appeared around 50 meters away from the church. They would have done so even closer, but there was a barrier that prevented them from that due to its holy properties. You're late. All four devils jumped in fright as they turned around to face the one that spoke in an even voice from behind them. To their further shock, they came face to face with Issei. How did you get here so fast? Kaneko surprised her peers that she spoke, especially since she sounded astonished. That, however, didn't mean that they didn't want to know either. After all, it didn't take more than 4 seconds for the completion of the teleportation spell. And the brunette was seemingly there before them, as inconceivable as it sounded. Instead of answering, Issei made a show of slowly unsheathing his sword. Not now. We have company. He said, after he unsheathed his sword and started to walk towards the church, bypassing the barrier as if it was never there. His words brought the devils back to reality and had them on high alert as they put on serious expressions and followed after him. As they passed the barrier, they sensed 2 of their sworn enemies to their left. To their inner curiosity, Issei seemed to have sensed those 2 before they did because he was looking up to his left. Following his gaze, they saw 2 female fallen angels standing imposingly on a branch of a tree, glaring down at them. One of them in playful smugness, the other in seriousness, albeit both held malice in their gazes. Apart from Raynare, who was the one glaring down at them in seriousness, there was a young-looking girl at Kaneko's height, dressed in a frilly Gothic Lolita dress. She had mid-back long, blonde hair, tied in twin pigtails on either side of her head. Unlike Kaneko, though, she had a visibly decent bust. Strangely enough, she seemed to have a sweet tooth like the white hair girl, if the lollipop she had in her mouth was any indication. This girl was Mitlet. Rias was about to step forward and start an interrogation on the fallen angels, but she was beaten to it by her contracted magician. Where's Raynare and Asia-chan? Issei demanded evenly, taking a seemingly relaxed stance that no one took notice how dangerous it really was. The human believes Mitlet's mocking laughter was viciously cut off by a tremendous wave of pure bloodlust coming from the one she was mocking. Said wave paralyzed everyone in a state of fear. More so because the brunette didn't even move from his spot or change expressions. I won't ask again, fallen angels. Issei warned as he raised his left arm, with his hand clenched in a fist, which pointed straight at the women on the tree. Boosted gear Drake's booming voice announced as the well-known gauntlet engulfed most of the brunette's arm. Both Raynare and Mitlet widened their eyes in shock at the development. This kid Raynare gulped in trepidation. As the Red Dragon Emperor Mitlet finished in a terrified voice, her trembling, indicating that it matched her voice and sentiment. Boost Drake's announcement made the fallen angel girls shiver in absolute fear, since it doubled both Issei's overall performance and the bloodlust he emitted. The devils were of the same mind, being internally thankful that he was their ally. Rias-san. Akeno-san. Despite calling out at the 2, Issei didn't remove his eyes from the terrified fallen angels. Knowing he had caught their attention touched the boosted gear. He ordered. The 4 devils blinked in surprise before the aforementioned 2 stepped up and did as were told. Boosted gear gift. Transfer. At that announcement, a crimson aura appeared around the 2 girls, whose eyes widened in disbelief at the amount of power entering their system. Then, once it was transferred to their bodies, they felt an intense bliss. They actually had an orgasm at the feeling, with their faces matching the color of Ria's hair, and they struggled to stay upright, not to mention their outright loud and orgasmic moans when they received the power-up. Kaneko and Kiba couldn't remove their eyes from the spectacle, with the fallen angels being overcome with confusion. Issei lowered his arm and started to walk away. Isay Rias called out with evident difficulty, if her ragged breathing was any indication. Where are you going? Raynare and Asia. You and Akeno-san deal with them however you want to. I can't waste time with them. That's what they want. Issei explained, without even looking at them. Mitlet and Raynare were about to express their anger at being dismissed like that, but before they could do that kaboom. Akeno used a thunder spell, which, with the power from the brunette's sacred gear, was enough to instantly destroy the tree the fallen angels were standing on, along with them as well, in a very loud and powerful display. Akeno giggled in delight at her spell's power, relishing in the fact that she had eradicated 2 fallen angels with said spell. I was hoping to do that in the first place yet, Ice-kun just made it easier for Lil Alemi. Rias huffed in exasperation at her queen's antics before she motioned for everyone to follow her. They sweat dropped when they noticed that the brunette was already at the church's entrance, which, even from their distance, they could tell that it was open. However, they saw him turn his head slightly towards their way, as if asking, "You coming or what?" Biba and Akeno, with their speed, were the first to reach Issei's sides, just as he opened the door completely and stepped inside, with Rias and Kaneko reaching them a second or two later. Inside, the main area was a complete mess, and the lights were off. The devils followed the soundless brunette towards the altar. Without breaking his stride, Issei spoke in an even tone to seemingly no one. "Unless you want to get hurt or, worse, die, get the fuck out of here." Kaneko tensed at those words as her instincts flared, making her turn around loudly enough to draw the attention of her confused peers. Once they all turned around, aside from Issei, who continued towards the altar, the devils saw the maniac grin of Fried Selzen, whose appearance put them on edge, since he carried a pistol and a light sword. Just as the devils were about to engage him in combat, the stray exorcist spoke in a deranged way with a matching smile. "Ara, it would be simplywonderful to slay all these devils chansbut. I know a lost fight when I see oneso. I'll leave to fight another dayyes. I'll leave now. Good luck. Issei chan devil chans. I'll see you another time." When he finished his craziness, Fried threw a flash bomb on his feet to obscure the devil's senses as to where he was going. Once the dust was clear, the devils relaxed and turned their attention to the brunette, who had just reached the altar in an arm's length distance. They jogged their way there, but they stopped when he motioned them to do so with his left hand, which was still sporting the Security's gauntlet. Raising his sword in an obvious attempt of an overhead swing, the devils watched in a mixture of awe, shock and amazement as its silverish blade turned an obsidian, shiny black. Then, with as much nonchalance it was raised, the sword descended, making a soft whistling sound. Fiba was the first to ask about what happened when, suddenly, the altar crumbled to its sides. Although, right before the action was complete, the devils were able to see that it was cleanly cut in half, revealing a flight of stairs that went downwards. All four devils couldn't stop the look of astonishment that came on their faces at the spectacle before them. Especially when the same thing happened to a part of the wall behind the altar a couple of seconds later. Unbelievable, Kiba gulped in disbelief. For a human to hold that much power in a single swing of their sword, Securitate or not, Ice-kun shouldn't be able to do something like this, he muttered under his breath for his comrades to hear him. Issei heard him too, but didn't care. He had already started descending the stairs, only one goal in his mind. Well, technically two, but with the same reason and outcome, save Raynare and Asia-chan, and get out of there unharmed. Rias shook her head to regain her bearings. Questions can wait. Ice doesn't. So, let's follow him and, if needed, help him to finish this as soon as possible. She declared seriously, taking the lead for her servants to follow, reaching the brunette quite quickly. The flight of stairs was surprisingly long. And dark. Everyone could see clearly, despite the fact that there was no light. When the group was reaching the end, there was a closed pair of doors in their line of sight. Issei swung his sword in a wide X pattern a couple of meters away from the double doors, which seemed to be made out of some kind of strong wood. And, just like last time the brunette performed the motion, the sword was covered in the same black shiny substance. A second and a half later, the doors collapsed inwards, cleanly cut in 4 pieces. Just as they stepped inside the hidden room, an ear-piercing screech stopped them in their tracks. Ai. Issei's heart stopped as he recognized the voice behind that screech. And, unfortunately, it wasn't Raynare's. It appeared that he was too late. No, Asia-chan. As the Italian nun screamed in absolute pain, Donaseek basked in his victory to have claimed her sacred gear, Twilight Healing. Thus, he was smirking smugly when 2 rings fell into his awaiting hands in a soft green glow. His victoriously smug gaze changed from the already unconscious, soon-to-be dead, nun to the barely conscious Raynare, who had her wrists and ankles chained to the wall behind Asia. Yet, the female fallen angel, even in her state, she looked at him with a gaze of pure hatred. He put on a show as he put on the rings on each ring finger, his smirk widening as he felt the power of the sacred gear enter his body. Yes, this power, even if it was solely for healing, shouldn't be used by humans. More so when it was an innocent nun that wielded said power up until just a few seconds ago. Then, Donaseek turned towards the commotion he had heard just before the ritual came to its end. If it was possible, he felt even more smugness upon the side of a wide-eyed in shock and horror, Issei Haidu and the stern gazes of the devils, led by the notorious Rias Gremory, as they were just a step behind the brunette. However, just as he was about to gloat at them, specifically the boy, Donaseek noticed something on the brunette's left arm that hadn't been there the last time he had seen him, which stopped him dead in his tracks. The gauntlet of the Red Dragon Emperor. The Securitate. He muttered under his breath in astonishment. If he had paid attention anywhere that wasn't the brunette's arm, the fallen angel would have seen Raynare's expression matching his own upon seeing Issei and the devils there, albeit hers also had joy and hope mixed in, as well as the surprise of the brunette being the Red Dragon Emperor. That, and the brunette's expression being hidden by his front hair. Even Asia regained consciousness for a second and managed to get a glimpse of her friend through her bleary eyes. She lost it immediately after, but there was a smile on her face, probably happy that her friend kept his promise. Donaseek shook his head to regain his composure and, once that was done, his expression returned to what it was before. Especially since the 40-something exorcists brandished their weapons towards the small group. It seems you're a little late, Securitate. Although, even if you are the Securitate, you're just a human. Therefore, had you come here any sooner, you wouldn't have been able to save little Asia. He gloated smugly, ignoring the dark crimson aura appearing around the brunette. The boy didn't respond to him, like he hoped. The fallen angel wanted the human to wail and plead for Asia's life and sacred gear like the helpless teenager that he was. Instead, he saw Rias Gremory step forward in an elegant way, standing on the brunette's left side as she addressed him in a professional tone. "Greetings, fallen angel Donaseek. I am Rias Gremory of the House of Gremory, and this," she gestured at her entourage, "is my peerage. Isay is my contracted magician, as I'm sure you know." "Indeed, I do, Rias Gremory." Donaseek confirmed, his smug expression turning a little malicious. "As I do know that you're in charge of Kuo Town. That said, unless you want to start a war between our factions, I would advise you to take your leave." The fallen angel didn't expect the Reed smirk knowingly at him. "I'm not so sure about that." She dismissed his unsubtle threat. "In fact, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the Archduke's orders. After all, according to your own organization, the entire group here is considered a rogue one." She revealed nonchalantly, her own expression becoming a little smug at the end. "And, even if I wouldn't be here, my contracted magician would have come, regardless of my wishes on the matter." She added as an afterthought, ignoring the irritation she felt at her own words, especially since they were true. For the second time that night, Donaseek lost his smugness, overcome by shock at the revelation about the group. Then, a thought crossed his mind. One that managed to make him forget his shock and replace it with pure malice. Rias noticed his change in demeanor, and she, along with her servants, narrowed their eyes suspiciously at the fallen angel. The group of devils were also internally surprised that the brunette had stayed silent up until this point. That said, they were the only ones in the surprisingly wide room that were unnerved by the dark crimson aura around Issei. And Rias had taken it upon herself to do the talking, since the brunette was in some kind of turmoil that he didn't seem able to escape from any time soon, thus buying him as much time as she could. Then, Donaseek's dark tone drew the devil's attention. "Since we are to be exterminated anyway, I suppose that taking down the sister of Serzich's Lucifer with me won't affect the fallen angels, and, therefore, there won't be another great war." He thought aloud, glaring at the Reed from his position like a predator as he revealed his black feathered wings. The devil showed no reaction at the sight of his four wings, indicating that the fallen angel had gained more power. The output he was giving off was something the group of four would be able to handle just fine. That is, if there weren't 40-something exorcists just waiting for the signal to pounce on them, and Issei being motionless the moment he stepped into the room. "Kuku. Ha 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 ha." Donaseek's maniacal laughter drew their attention off of the brunette once again. "Ice, whatever is going on in your head, it's time you snap out of it." Rias whispered to him as she prepared herself for battle, a crimson and black aura around her, with her peerage coming on either side of her and Issei, taking their own stances. She had done what she could to buy some time. Now, it was time for her magician to snap out of whatever was happening to him. The kendo had even changed to a Maiko outfit, one that shrine maidens wore. Kiba had produced a sword with his sacred gear, Sword Birth, as he took a basic kendo stance. Kaneko just cracked her knuckles. All four devils glared at everyone before them, with their adversaries wearing matching expressions directed at them. The tension in the room reached its peak. And that's when it happened. There was no warning, no move, no anything. A shockwave of something engulfed the entire room in less than a second. Yet, no one moved from their positions. There was a moment that time seemed to stop. Then, it returned with unprecedented results. Thud 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 thud. One by one, all the exorcists fell to the ground like sacks of potatoes, unconscious, their eyes rolled to the back of their heads and foaming at their mouths. Onasik, who was trembling because of the shockwave that had passed over him, could only look in shock and horror at the sight of his subordinates somehow getting out of commission. He knew that the silent security had something to do with this development, but he couldn't even think as to how exactly it happened. The devils were understandably shocked as well. Kaneko more so than anyone else as she looked at the brunette boy in a mixture of awe, amazement, comprehension and fear. Raynare, who was fully conscious, despite her beaten-up state and the chains that held her on the wall, was also shocked about what just happened, if her wide eyes in disbelief, that matched everyone else's, were an indication. What happened? She was the only one to voice in a whisper that was heard throughout the deathly silent room what was on her fellow fallen angels and the devil's minds. You. Onasik seethed in utter rage as he glared hatefully at the brunette boy, making the devils and Raynare jump a little in surprise due to how loud he was. What have you done? He demanded with a scream, flaring all his unholy power towards the boy and, by extension, the devils around him. Said devil suppressed a shiver, since the fallen angels' power was their weakness and their instincts reminded them of that little fact. Step. Despite how light it was, that one step forward made by Issei was the loudest one he had made in front of people ever since Rin left. It made the devils and Raynare shiver in visible terror just by hearing it. Onasik was in his own world of pure unadulterated fury to even care about such a small detail. Step. Another step, followed by the dark crimson aura around Issei intensifying in a significant amount, almost to the point of solidifying like an extra skin. Again, the delirious from anger fallen angel ignored that detail as he breathed harshly and gritted his teeth. Step. The third step was the final one as Issei stopped moving, making the already thick tension in the room reach unbelievable levels. Fallen angel Onasik. Drake surprised everyone with his grim, stern, booming voice, the green jewel on the gauntlet glowing erratically as he spoke. You have made a terrible mistake. Yet, I should thank you for your foolishness. Because, even if it was an extremely painful experience for my partner, your actions have managed to help him. What are you talking about, heavenly dragon? Onasik voiced the confusion he and everyone that wasn't Issei felt at the dragon's words, his enraged eyes never leaving the brunette in question. The nun. Drake explained, his voice sounding stronger than before, although it still carried its grim and stern tone. By extracting her sacred gear and by extension killing her, was the catalyst my partner needed to reach it. He emphasized his last word, albeit in a cryptic way. It? Rias inquired in confusion, tilting her head a little to the left to have a better view at the gauntlet. It? Onasik parroted, sharing the Redeed sentiment on the matter. Hibba was the only one that understood what the dragon was implying, but he was unable to say anything due to the shock he felt. After all, he and his comrades were about to be witnesses to a once-in-a-lifetime spectacle. His eyes reflected the awe and disbelief he felt about what was going to happen in a few seconds. Give him hell, partner. And, even though the circumstances are not favorable, congratulations are in order. Drake ignored the two that voiced their confusion as he spoke in a strong, proud, yet a little remorseful tone. As soon as the dragon finished speaking, a bright blinding crimson light enveloped the brunette, making everyone shield their eyes with their forearms. Raynare just forced hers shut tightly. Then, a wave of unparalleled power washed over the entire room, feeling like gravity was reversed in a violent way. The devils and Raynare felt a small weight drop on their shoulders, which surprised them, considering the sheer amount of power Issei emanated through the blinding crimson light. However, since Onasik was the one this feeling was aimed at in the first place, the fallen angel fell flat on his stomach, forming spider webs around his body from the force that fell on his being, the air in his lungs vanishing in a violent way. His expression was that of shock and horror, and his mouth was opened in a silent scream of agony. Just when the power, seemingly, rose to its peak, Drake made a booming announcement that sent shivers down everyone's spines. Welsh Dragon Balance Breaker. Scale Mail. In a relatively remote area of Kuo Town, two certain individuals played a fighting video game at one's home. Both were dressed in their pajamas and wore competitive smirks as they tried to beat one another, smashing buttons left and right in an attempt to do so. Suddenly, however, both stiffened at the feeling of power that washed over them and most likely the entirety of Kuo. So, it seems that Onasik's plan, while a success, backfired on him in a spectacular fashion. One of them said in a laid-back, yet excited manner. Yeah. The other agreed simply. Hopefully, Haidu will be a challenge when we fight. They grinned in anticipation. At least, you have some self-control. The first teased in a sarcastic tone. Much more than you do when you encounter peculiar sacred gear holders. I'm the prime example of that. The second deadpanned. That's true. The first laughed shamelessly. The second person shook their head before both returned their attention to their game. I'll smash your face in. In your dreams. Sona and her peerage were at the SCO, finishing up their paperwork while also waiting for Ria's news about what was happening. Apart from Tsubaki, Yura, Momo and Ria, Sona had added 3 more peerage members whom she made part of the student council. Tsubaki was her queen, Yura was a rook, Momo and Ria were both bishops. The 3 additions were Tomo Meguri, a second-year student, Genshiro Saji, the same age as the former and a first-year girl, who went by the name Maruko Nomura. The latter was a pawn, plain and simple. Saji, due to his sacred gear absorption line, which was one of the 4 or 5 parts of the Dragon King Vritra, took 4 pawns, leaving Sona with 3 more. As for Tomo, she became the first knight of the group. Just as they finished their tasks, a wave of power washed over them and they all shuddered, Sona included. What was that? Kaichu Saji exclaimed in a mixture of shock and worry with a small stutter, staring at his king with a matching expression. In fact, everyone, even Tsubaki, looked at Sona the same way, who was the only one that was calm and collected, despite her earlier shudder. Sona fixed her glasses, making the light in the room reflect in an ominous way that matched her tone. Was Haidu Issei releasing his full power as the Sekiryuite? Whatever happens in that church must be bad enough to make him do so. She analyzed clinically. Not too far from the truth, but she was smart enough to come close to such a conclusion. Seriously, Saji muttered under his breath but was easily heard in the silent room, his voice showing a mix of awe, amazement and fear. Sona understood those emotions. Despite not showing it, she felt the same way as her pawn. After all, the amount of power she and the others felt completely surpassed their combined might by a large margin. Yes. She confirmed in her business-like tone. Then, in the same tone that held a hint of warning in it, she reminded them of a small fact that sent shivers down the spines of her servants. Keep in mind that Haidu-kun is still a human, which makes the fact that he has so much power an extraordinary one in its own right. As the events with people in the general area of Kuo were happening, back at the wide room in the church the light died down, allowing the devils and Raynare their side again. Their eyes landed on Issei immediately, making the aforementioned people slightly gasp in awe and surprise. The brunette stood imposingly, almost proudly, covered from head to toe in a shiny, metallic crimson draconian armor, with a very long thin pointy tail that started from the base of the armor's neck. On either side of his mid-back, there was a propulsion of some kind, in the shape of a wing, all crimson in color. The eyes of his mask were the same shade of dark green as his own original ones. There were dark green jewels on all his joints and a big one at the center of his chest. Surprisingly, the armor didn't make him overly bulky. Just imposing. On a side note, Issei still kept a hold of the sword in his right hand. Even through their amazed minds, the devils and Raynare could feel the amount of power Issei emitted as he clearly glared at the down Donaseek through his mask. But the nary a sound, the armored brunette turned his gaze at Raynare, who suppressed a flinch at the notion before he looked at the device Asia was crucified on. He noticed that his friend was dressed in a frilly white nightgown that reached her ankles and showed the minimum amount of cleavage possible. Seeing her serenely smiling face made his already bleeding heart to ache even more. His only solace was that Asia was unharmed, unlike Raynare. None of the conscious people blinked. Yet, in an impossible show of speed, Issei was right before the down Donaseek, using his tail to lift the horrified fallen angel by coiling it around his neck in an almost crashing grip. And that was done without a sound, making everyone that wasn't Issei shudder in fear of the unknown. Then, noiselessly, he walked towards the stupefied Raynare, stopping an arm's length away, struggling in vain to escape from his tail Donaseek behind him. With 2 nonchalant swings of his sword in an X motion, Raynare was freed from her shackles, collapsing on her knees with a surprised yet cute yelp before she stared up at her armored rescuer in a mixture of awe and amazement at his skills, as well as gratefulness and confusion for rescuing her in the first place. Donaseek grunted in pain as he was forced forward and on his knees, facing his fellow fallen angel, albeit with his eyes closed. Heal her. Issei's even, yet imposing voice was heard for the first time since entering the room, without releasing the fallen angel from his tail. In fact, it seemed that his grip tightened around the other's neck. Another pained grunt escaped Naseek's mouth as he shakily raised both his arms, and a soft green glow emanated from the rings on his fingers. Raynare closed her eyes and sighed in relief as all the pain and her wounds evaporated in mere seconds. In the meantime, Rias and her peerage approached them, with Aridid using minimal amounts of her power of destruction to erase the unconscious exorcists from existence on their way. The devils were witnesses in a front row seat of Twilight Healing's amazing power, which made Raynare as good as new. As the female fallen angel basked in her well-being, Issei moved to the front of the crucified Asia, ignoring Donaseek's painted grunts coming from behind him. He raised his left hand and touched the nun's right cheek so softly, as if she would break like a porcelain plate should he touch her just a tiny bit roughly. When he retracted his hand, he turned his head to his right, where, from the corner of his eye, he could see Rias and her peerage wearing unreadable expressions. "Rias-san, would you do me a favor?" he asked evenly. "As long as it's in my capabilities, of course, Ice." Rias confirmed with a nod of her head, hiding her emotions behind a mask of professionalism. Issei returned his gaze at his dead, yet smiling friend. "Would you, please, reincarnate Asia-chan into a devil when I give her back what belongs to her?" he requested politely yet evenly, all the while ignoring the fallen angel's increasing struggle from behind him. Rias and her peerage were surprised by his request, even if they somewhat expected it. Iridide smiled kindly as she spoke from her heart with a matching tone. "Of course, Ice. It will be my pleasure to have Asia under mine and your protection. And, to tell you the truth, her sacred gear will be an invaluable asset in the future." The armored brunette nodded in acknowledgement of her words, inwardly appreciating her honesty. "Thank you, Rias-san. Both for your acceptance of my selfish request and for your honesty." He spoke evenly, his eyes never leaving the face of his blonde friend. "What about the scum in your tail, Ice-kun?" All heads turned to the approaching Raynare, whose disgust over the struggling fallen angel was palpable, if her tone and expression were anything to go by. She stopped at a respectable distance away. She may trust a brunette, but she didn't feel the same way about the devils behind him, even if they seemed indifferent to her presence. In fact, the chick in the Maiko outfit gave her a complicated gaze, as if trying to sympathize with her. Raynare didn't want anyone's pity, so she purposefully ignored the devil's stares, focusing on her armored rescuer as she crossed her arms under her breasts, making them more prominent in the process. After all, her leathery outfit, apart from her mid-thigh-high high-heeled boots, was barely considered as such, since it covered the essentials. The female fallen angel ignored the heated glare she received from the short white-haired girl. In response to Raynare's earlier question, the brunette surprised his audience by dismissing his scale mail and, with it, the pressure he emitted while wearing it, making the devils and Raynare breathe a light sigh of relief. Onisik was on his hands and knees, coughing and gasping violently to regain his lost breath. Issei turned around, sword in hand, his eyes on the kneeling fallen angel. "I'll do to him what he did on Asia-chan, albeit way worse." He finally responded, his tone changing to an emotionless one to hide his boiling fury. Unsurprisingly, Raynare seemed happy to hear that, if her vindictive smirk at Onisik was any indication. "As the dragon in your sacred gear said earlier, give him hell, Ice-kun." She cheered him on. The devils sweat-dropped at her antics, even if they agreed with her. "You know something, Raynare?" Issei asked her evenly, his eyes not leaving his target. The devils and the female fallen angel took several steps backwards at his words, due to a strange yet overwhelmingly bloodthirsty aura, almost suffocating them. It was pitch black, coated in ethereal blue and blood red. None of the people present had ever heard or read about this kind of aura before. "I wasn't asking for your permission." Issei continued where he left off, raising his sword to chest level on his right, while, at the same time, stomping his right foot on his target due to the latter seeming ready to regain his bearings, making him fall flat on his stomach with great force. "I was just stating a fact. This bastard dared to kill Asia-chan, right in front of my eyes to boot. I won't kill him. Rias-san will do that. I'll just make him wish he was never born." As the brunette spoke, the aura around him enveloped him in a swirling pillar that reached the ceiling, making the bloodlust in the air increase to suffocating levels. Then, Issei made an announcement from inside the pillar that sent uncontrollable shivers down everyone's spines. "Cleave the moon in half, Zangetsu." Boom. With a certain duo, there was another pause in their game. Both felt the sheer amount of bloodlust in the air, lasting for merely 2 seconds. Not to mention the explosion they heard, which might have been spectacular to witness up close. On a side note, now that they thought about it, it should be impossible to hear and feel things outside of a barrier. So, either the barrier had fallen, or the Haidu boy was just that powerful to bypass a barrier's restraints with the ease of breathing. They glanced at each other in seriousness, contemplating on interfering with the situation at the church. However, no matter how much they wanted to, they thought better than to reveal themselves so prematurely. The time for that would come, sooner or later. After all, a third party had been busy around Europe as of late, no doubt being up to good. So, as cringe-worthy as it was, they should wait. Patiently. After what had happened a small while ago, Sona didn't want to take any other chances. So, with the help of her entire peerage, she erected a barrier in the scope to keep themselves safe from similar phenomena happening again. She was so sure that their barrier would hold strong that neither Sona herself nor her peerage were ready when they felt a wave of suffocating bloodlust wash over them, making them choke on their own saliva. Also, whoever was standing collapsed on their hands and knees. That said, all of them couldn't stop their expressions from becoming absolutely terrified. Including Sona. Thankfully, it lasted for only 2 seconds. However, the explosion that followed made them all jump to their feet on high alert, in spite of their states. Sona knew she was making a rash decision due to her worry for her childhood friend, but didn't want to risk said friend's life. "Tsubaki, everyone. We're going to the church." The SCP, short for Student Council President, ordered strongly as she stood up and fixed her glasses in a swift motion, leaving no room for arguments on the matter. "Yes, Kaichu." All of her peerage chorused, albeit with audible reluctance. In a matter of 2.5 seconds, all of them had gathered together and, with a flick of Sona's and Tsubaki's fingers, they disappeared in a teleportation circle. When they emerged from the circle, Sona and her peerage found themselves just outside of the church's barrier. The sight before them managed to surprise even Sona, even if the SCP somewhat expected it. There was no church in sight, only a crater in its place. Sona didn't want to waste any more time, and she started walking, taking the lead towards the crater. She noticed that she didn't feel the usual chills upon being in close proximity to holy grounds. Probably because the establishment for producing said chills was no more. And, despite her purposeful stride towards where she could feel her friends and the bloodlust's whereabouts, Sona's mind was sharp enough to notice a serious detail. How did those waves and the explosion bypass the barrier and were felt throughout Kuo? Sona knew she wouldn't get an answer anytime soon, but also knew the culprit behind that question, who was probably too preoccupied to notice such details. Since the distance to the crater wasn't all that big to begin with, the Citri peerage arrived there in a matter of seconds. There was still dust in the air, obscuring their view of whatever was happening down there. To her inner relief, Sona detected the signatures of Rias and her peerage, as well as 2 fallen angels. One of whom, much to her curiosity, wielded a sacred gear. "Everyone, be on alert. We're going down there." Sona ordered in the same way as before as she unfurled her wings and took flight towards Ria's location. Saji was about to protest, but Yura's strong grip on his shoulder made him stop in his tracks. With an almost inaudible sigh of defeat and trepidation, he followed the rest of the peerage, flying behind Sona. Rias coughed in her hand several times to get rid of the dust inside her lungs, hearing peerage and Raynare do the same thing. When the explosion of power and bloodlust happened, they were all thrown all the way back to a wall, which, a little painfully for herself, Raynare and Yudo, stopped their flight. The dust had somewhat cleared at her position, but it was still pretty thick where her contracted magician, Asia and Donosik were. Her senses tingle when she feels a familiar signature, accompanied with several others, coming her way. She didn't dare to sigh in relief at the unexpected backup. After all, the Redeed could tell that Issei was just getting warmed up in whatever he had planned for Donosik. "Rias." Redeed turned her head to her right, where she heard the call of her childhood friend. "Sona." She responded in kind. Sona and her entourage took a moment to observe the well-being of Rias and the rest. "What is the fallen angel doing with you?" Sona asked the immediate question in her usual tone as she fixed her glasses. For the moment, she ignored Saji's blatant ogling of the almost nude female fallen angel. Raynare did too as she spoke. "I'm on Ice-kun's side, Citri," she said harshly as she crossed her arms under her breasts, gaining the attention of everyone there. Saji almost flew away from his nosebleed at the sight, had it not been for Yura having a strong grip on his shoulder. "Raynare is considered a rogue, along with the rest of the group here," Akeno explained softly as she looked at said female. "Although, unlike her and Donosik, the rest are not alive. Soon, Donosik will have the same fate if the bloodlust coming from Ice-kun is any indication." At the last of her words, all heads turned to the clearing dust, watching as 3 bleary silhouettes slowly came into view. One was clearly still and crucified. The second was standing and stepping over the third, holding something in both hands. "Wait, both." The Gremory peerage thought collectively in confusion. Sona and her peerage were even more confused, but decided to stay silent in anticipation. Suddenly, a shockwave erupted from a mere wave of the standing figure's left arm, clearing the dust all around in less than half a second, making the devils and Raynare to shield their eyes with their forearms in protection. When they looked again in that direction, they all gasped in a mixture of awe, amazement, comprehension and fear. What greeted their eyes was Issei imposingly stepping on a barely conscious Donosik who was flat on his stomach, with Asia being crucified and unharmed behind them. However, what drew their breaths out of their lungs was another thing entirely. The brunette held a massive cleaver-like black sword with a big handle and no guard in his right hand. In his left, there was another sword, also black in color, that resembled a kyber knife, and it had no guard as well, but was significantly shorter, almost as long as one of his arms. AN. Again, Google Ichigo Kurosaki's True Shikai to get a visual of the swords. Both swords were as magnificent as they looked absolutely deadly. The devils and Raynare were left speechless just by looking at the swords. Without uttering a word, Issei forcefully rolled Donasek on his back with his foot, making the fallen angel grunt in pain. Then, much to the fascinated horror of the audience, the brunette started slicing the fallen angel, who could only scream in unbearable agony, in several parts of the latter's body. It was quite clear that this was pure torture. Especially since Issei allowed his prey to heal himself and repeated the process from the beginning. When it happened for the third time, Saji and Nomura couldn't stop themselves from vomiting. The rest sympathized with them, especially Sona. She knew she would have to comfort her peerage after such a brutal display of violence. Rias too, but in a way smaller degree. After all, her peerage had experience in violence of some kind in their pasts. It didn't help that Donasek pleaded for his death after the fifth time, crying like a lunatic child as he did so. That said, if anyone paid attention to their surroundings, they would have seen Akeno and Raynare being aroused at the sight before them. Understandable, since they were both sadists, albeit also with masochistic tendencies. The display they were witnessing made them want the brunette in their clutches. The horrible display of violence and dominance ended at the 10th repeat, which was when Donasek was about to pass out from mental and physical exhaustion. Upon seeing Issei going towards the crucified Asia, noiselessly as ever, Rias walked her way to the pitifully whimpering Donasek, the rest following behind her in a respectable distance. The Redi didn't even bat an eyelash as she erased from existence the fallen angel at her feet with her power of destruction. Two rings, glowing a soft green light, were left where Donasek's ring fingers were. Rias picked them up, knowing what was following next. The entire devil entourage and Raynare watched in silence as Issei's swords reverted back to the short sword, with Sona and her peerage being a little underwhelmed at the sight. Then, the brunette cut off the chains of the weird cross device, with two swift swings in an X pattern, before, in a fluid motion, he sheathed the sword on his waist. He was so quick with his moves that he managed to catch Asia in a bridal carry as she fell from her restraints. Turning around, he searched for a clean spot to place his friend, but found none, since the whole place was destroyed by the release of Zangetsu's true form. His eyes fell on the Redi devil, who was looking at him with a complicated gaze, as were the others behind her. His heart clenched at the looks of fear from some of them, but he didn't show any outward reaction to that. "Ria-san, is it possible to reincarnate Asia-chan while I'm holding her?" the brunette asked hopefully, his expressionless mask breaking for the first time after his rampage. Rias thought about it for a moment before she shrugged cluelessly. "I don't know, Ice. Can you try, at least?" He probed with another question in the same manner. The Redi sighed in defeat, knowing that there wouldn't be a way to convince him to place the nun on the ground. "Fine." His small smile at her acceptance, accompanied with a soft grateful gaze, made several hearts skip a beat. "Thank you, Ria-san." The Redi fought down the creeping blush on her cheeks as she stepped forward and magically produced a crimson bishop evil piece. She figured that Asia's ability with that specific evil piece and a little training would skyrocket in the future. Hopefully, the excommunicated nun would be ready when her personal problem knocked her door. Putting those thoughts in the back of her mind, Rias put the rings on each of Asia's index fingers. Then, she released some of her demonic power to start the reincarnation ritual. After a moment, a magic circle appeared under hers and Issei's feet, bearing the Gremory crest, indicating that it was time to reincarnate the girl in the brunette's arms. "I order you, Asia Argento, in the name of Rias Gremory. Rise, my bishop, and enjoy your new life as my servant." At the end of Ria's chant, the evil piece sank itself in Asia's chest. A moment passed before some color returned to the blonde skin. When Asia groaned quietly as her eyes fluttered open, Issei's soft expression and smile brightened considerably. Several females felt their hearts skip some beats at the sight. In the end, Rias had one thought in her mind as Asia and Issei had a tearful and touching reunion for all the trouble this mess had caused. Totally worth it. Issei woke up from his night's sleep, feeling a little sore due to his deadly spar with his two tenants. A week went by since the events at the church. Ever since then, things had been slow, supernatural-wise. Even school-wise. At his home, however, things were completely opposite. Due to his own insistence, Asia and Raynare now lived under the same roof as himself and his parents, with both parties being more than happy at the arrangement, all for their own reasons. Sona and Rias were in agreement of this arrangement because, that way, they could keep a close eye on the female fallen angel, since the latter was rogue and, therefore, vulnerable to every other supernatural being but themselves and Issei. Issei was more than a little enthused by the prospect of having two daughters to dote on, who could become real daughters-in-law and give her as many grandbabies to spoil as they could. Issei didn't even attempt to break his mother from her daydream, being equal parts bewildered and amused by how fast she accepted two new people in their home. The same could be said for his father, who congratulated his son for starting his harem at such an early age, much to the latter's exasperation. Funny thing, though, was that Asia was equally embarrassed and determined to become one of Issei's wives. Especially when his own mother suggested no, demanded so. Raynare's response was straight to the point. She agreed with his mother without a second thought or even a tiny speck of hesitation, which was followed by her eyeing him like a delectable piece of meat. Greg's explanation to this strange, for the brunette, development was that all supernatural beings were attracted to power. Either seeking for enemies or lovers, it didn't matter. The fact of the matter was that power attracts power in more ways than one. Anyway. Asia attended Kuo Academy, with Sona placing her in Issei's class, much to the joy of both the brunette and the blonde. Although, Issei could have done without the blatant ogling from the perverted duo, who upon trying to ask if Asia was single, cursed his existence with the most vigor he had ever seen and heard from them when the Italian girl announced in front of the whole class that she was living with him, his parents and an older girl. Said older girl had opted to stay in her true appearance, albeit wearing proper clothes inside his house. Speaking of clothes, Issei had given Raynare half of his remaining money for the girls to go shopping, with Asia being her usual cute and shy self about it and Raynare almost jumping him on the spot. On a side note, much to Issei's pleasant surprise, the female fallen angel was totally respectful towards him and his parents, with Asia following in her footsteps like a cute little puppy. Raynare, on her own volition, opted to stay at his home and not have a job in order to protect his parents, especially Issei. She never told him that it was mostly out of gratitude for saving her life in the first place. Unsurprisingly, both Issei and Goro were fine with Raynare's decision. Issei too, but on a smaller scale than his parents. Issei liked Raynare's company and vice versa, with the latter taking lessons about housework from the former. Asia was in the same boat as Raynare in all terms, apart from the fact that she had to attend Kuo Academy. Speaking of the establishment, Issei was internally happy that his blonde friend was able to make several friends in her first few days at school. Including, but not limited to, Kiryuika, Murayama and Kadis, with the first continuously teasing Asia about her relationship with Issei. The brunette didn't mind. In fact, he appreciated that Aika was friendly towards Asia, even if it was in a slightly bizarre way. The perverted duo were off limits, though. It was the only thing he was adamant about and, thankfully, he had the support from all the girls in his class, if not the entire school. On a totally different note, since Asia was a devil under Rias' grimoire, she subsequently became a member of the Orc, where she was very easily accepted from all the devils. The fact that she could spend more time with Issei and make even more friends in the process was just a pleasant bonus for the blonde Italian girl. She didn't have a hard time adapting to her life as a devil. Rias had even praised her that she handed out her leaflets in just 2 days and nights. As if that wasn't enough, Asia performed her first contract in her third night, perfectly at that, getting praise from her client, much to Rias' pride and Asia's joyful embarrassment. Rias and her peerage's heads could have been even better if Asia stopped trying to pray out of habit, something that amused Issei every time he witnessed that happening. All in all, it was a peaceful week for Issei, which was a pleasant change of pace and helped him relax considerably. That is, apart from the few hours he got to sleep at night. Dragons and Jetsu didn't relent on their deadly spars at all. In fact, since he had attained balance breaker, both had become even more ruthless in their spars, forcing him to fight in it. That said, Issei didn't mind. In his mind, these two, for the time being, were the only ones that could fight him on equal grounds, even if he was handicapped and couldn't use his dragon-slaying abilities. So, the brunette opted to just relax and enjoy the peace and quiet for as long as they lasted. It was a slightly chilly Saturday night, with Issei and Asia being at the Orc. Well, Issei and Rias were alone there. All the others were out, performing their contracts. The brunette had closed his eyes and relaxed on the couch, his back and head leaning comfortably at the back of said furniture. Rias was overviewing the last of her paperwork, signing some of the papers whenever it was needed. If Issei had paid attention to her, he would have seen Rias wearing black framed glasses, making her look more mature and sexy than she already was. On a side note, the brunette had never paid attention to the redeed whenever the latter was doing her paperwork. Once Rias reached the final paper for the night, she blinked in surprise at its context, which turned to worry mid-reading. "Ice." She called out to the brunette in question as she looked at him with a worried gaze. When she got an acknowledging hum, she spoke again. "There is a contract meant specifically for you." She elaborated, making some of her worry apparent by her voice. Issei frowned slightly as he turned to face her finally with his eyes open. Momentarily, he blinked in surprise upon seeing her in glasses, but knew better than to address this now. How come? He asked curiously. Isn't that a little uncommon even for renowned devils? Yes. Rias nodded in confirmation. Which is why this has me worried. Especially since it isn't widely known that you're my contracted magician who can perform contracts on occasion. She added in an explanatory tone, her expression turning serious. That had Issei on alert as well, but hid it well under a mask of curiosity. Where does the client want to meet? He asked. Rias glanced at the paper to ensure that she hadn't read the information wrong. At the client's house, which is in a remote area, almost at the edge of Kuo. She informed him as she looked back at him. The request also says that you can take your time going there, since there's no rush. She added as an afterthought, which became alertness and her eyes narrowed in suspicion. Hatching on why the Redeed was suddenly on edge, Issei reassured her in a calm voice. Don't worry, Rias-san. The client most likely suggests that I can go there after I finish whatever business I could have tonight. Rias wasn't convinced. I have reported your motion sickness to the underworld. So, if you add the fact that the client requested you specifically, there's a high possibility that your client is someone from supernatural. She explained her case seriously. The brunette internally gave her credit for the sharpness of her mind. Even if that's the case, it would be rude of me to not at least appear there. Not to mention the negativity it could bring to your name. He argued calmly, having acknowledged the possibility for his client to be of the supernatural. I don't care about my name when the safety of my peerage and my contracted magician is in jeopardy. Rias responded strongly, truly believing in her own words. She didn't know it, but at that moment, Issei's respect for her rose even more. That said, you do have a point. It would be rude to not appear there. She conceded with a thoughtful look. Worst case scenario, you leave from there and you don't sign a contract. She finished with a careless shrug of her shoulders. Issei stood up from the couch and took the paper from the Redeed's hand once she offered it to him to get a look at it himself. Quick question before I go, Rias-san. The brunette said calmly as he read the paper. At her questioning hum, he asked in the same manner. Does Asia-chan have another contract for tonight? Not that I know of. Rias shook her head as she responded before her gaze turned curious. Why though? She asked. Issei looked at her as he explained his reason for such a question. Because I don't know how long this contract will take. If possible, I would like me and Asia-chan to return home at the same time. If, by any chance, my contract lasts longer than hers, I would have to ask you to escort her to my house. After all, I wouldn't like for something unexpected to happen to her while I'm busy and unable to help her. Rias hid the pang of jealousy she felt for her bishop to have a person such as Issei under an understanding smile. Of course, Ice. You can count on me. She affirmed, hiding her wish for him to spend the same amount of attention he spent on Asia and Raynare. With a kind smile and a grateful nod at her words, which made her heart skip a beat, Issei turned around and went towards the door in his usual noiseless manner. Once he was out of the room, Rias took off her glasses and turned them slightly in order for the room's dim light to make it so she could see her own reflection on the lenses. There, she saw a very determined Redeed who wanted nothing more than to come close to a certain brunette Sekirute. Especially after her personal problem would be resolved one way or another. Because, after witnessing firsthand what said Sekirute was capable of, she didn't have any doubt that he would be the ace she needed for her situation to turn on her favor. She smirked in satisfaction with herself that she found such an excellent ally. Now, if only she could become close to the person of her thoughts, that would make her a very happy woman. Rias schooled her features just as she felt her queen returning from her contract. She didn't want Akeno to tease her about her thoughts on a certain brunette. I'm back, Rias. Akeno announced her return softly. Welcome back, Akeno. The Redeed greeted her best friend. The brunette blinked in surprise when she wasn't greeted by more than one person. Ara, where are the others? She asked curiously as she glanced around the room. Hineko, Asia and Yudo haven't returned from their contracts. Rias explained with a smile. What about Ice-kun? Akeno asked in both curiosity and interest. The latter irked Rias, but held herself back from questioning her queen as to why she was so interested in the brunette. She would have to take a number, it seemed, since Ona was obviously interested in Issei as well. Damn it, she would have to act fast. And behind the backs of all interested parties, including Asia and Raynare. Especially since the older woman and Fallen Angel had the approval of the Haidu matriarch. According to her bishop, who also shared that approval from the aforementioned human woman. The Redeed didn't show any of her thoughts as she calmly responded to her queen's question. Ice just left a few minutes ago for his own contract. In fact, it was a contract specifically for him. The Kendo blinked in momentary surprise before her eyes narrowed in suspicion, coming to the same conclusion as her king did a few minutes ago. My thoughts exactly. Rias read her friend like an open book, her expression turning serious. However, Ice insisted on going out of respect to the client's request. She explained. The Kendo's expression softened a little at that. Well, at the very least, if worse comes to worst, Ice-kun is very capable of handling himself, from what we have seen. She tried to sound reassuring for both herself and her king. True. Rias agreed with a nod of her head and a small smile. But we both agreed that, should the situation turn risky, he would flee immediately. She informed her friend in a calm tone. The brunette breathed a small sigh in relief at that, hoping that the securite wouldn't run into trouble trying to perform a contract. Again. Let's just hope that, whoever Ice-kun meets tonight, they will be a peaceful individual, like your brother, instead of Sona's sister. While not overly fond of the mere idea of her contracted magician meeting her brother so early and without being notified properly, Rias conceded her queen's point. Better Surzich's Lucifer, who had Graphia keeping him in line, than Seraphol Leviathan, who went around all alone and wouldn't hesitate to flash freeze whoever came close to Sona without her permission first. Rias had to suppress a shiver as she nodded in agreement to Kendo's words. Yes, let's. Despite the request saying he could take his time, Issei reached his destination at a pretty fast pace, stopping at a respectable distance away from his client's house, which looked totally normal at first glance. Well, that is, it would have been completely normal if there wasn't a transparent barrier around it. Something that prevented the brunette from smelling and hearing anything from the inside. That, and he would have missed it if the road lights hadn't made it visible as they reflected on the barrier. Breathing a sigh of resignation at his ability to attract trouble without even trying, Issei walked through the barrier. To his relief, he didn't smell any blood at all, which meant that his client was still alive and well. That said, Ria's deduction was very accurate. Inside the house, there were two people, instead of one. From what he could smell, one had the scent of a fallen angel, and it was a male's, probably a middle-aged one. The other, much to his curiosity, had the scent of both a devil and a dragon, but seemed to be somewhere around the same age as himself. Both people, according to his nose, wore a hefty amount of aroma, probably to hide their distinctive scents from him. They had done a great job of hiding their nature, though, for which he gave them credit. If anyone else from Ria's peerage had been in his place, the brunette was pretty sure they would have easily missed these small details. Partner. Drake's serious voice called out to him from the inside of his head, cutting him off of his musings and stopping him just as he was about to knock the door. What is it, Drake? Issei asked curiously, albeit a little impatiently. I can feel my rival inside this house. At the dragon's words, the brunette's expression turned serious as he glared at the door in front of him, as if he could see through it and straight at the person in question. Are you sure? He basically demanded from his partner. Because, if that was the case, he could have been called here to fight. There's no mistaking my rival's aura. Drake explained in a serious tone. I know Albion's aura better than anything else in the world. So, yes. I am absolutely certain about my claim. Issei's eyes narrowed dangerously at that. This situation was worse than last week's mess. Again, it was a good thing that he himself was the one to be summoned and not anyone else from Ria's peerage. At least Drake's calm voice brought him out of his thoughts. There's no malicious intent coming from the house. Whoever is inside with Albion's host, they must be pretty powerful and can keep the former in check. So, there's no need for you to be so much on guard. Not that you should be completely nonchalant about this either. He explained and advised his host in a calm fashion. Issei heeded the dragon's advice, and his entire demeanor relaxed, albeit not completely, before he lightly knocked on the door 3 times. The door's open. Come in. Came the nonchalant and a little bit jovial voice of whom Issei believed to be the middle-aged fallen angel from the inside. The brunette entered the house as noiselessly as ever and walked towards where he presumed to be the living room, from where the scents of the two people came. From his position, he could see every single detail about them as they were lounging on the couches and sipped from their drinks. The fallen angel was a tall, handsome man in his mid to late 30s, with short, slick black hair, which had a golden bang on the top. He wore a grey yukata, but Issei could tell that his physique was of a well-trained and battle-hardened one. The man's attitude seemed completely laid back, but his sharp dark eyes told another story upon spotting the brunette. The other person was a short silver-haired boy in his late teens and, true to his heritage, was devilishly handsome. Even seated, Issei could tell that the young man was a little taller than himself, but just slightly. He wore a plain black short-sleeved t-shirt, a pair of blue jeans and matching sneakers. His blue eyes and smirk were ones of amusement and carried the same laid-back demeanor upon seeing Issei enter the room. "Welcome to my humble abode, Haidu-san." The tall man greeted the brunette in a jovial manner. "Please, take a seat and have a drink." He gestured with his free hand to the unoccupied couch. "Nice to meet you." Issei greeted back with a respectful bow of his head. Whoever was able to keep in check a host of a heavenly dragon deserved his respect, in his mind. The brunette took his seat as was told, but didn't make a move to have a drink of his own. The man hummed in question, noticing the small detail. "You're not gonna drink, Haidu-san?" he asked curiously. "No. I'm a minor, after all." Issei responded curtly, biting back his sarcasm from coming out. "Of course." The man sighed in dejection. "I was hoping to have a drinking buddy, aside from my adopted son." For a moment, Issei could have sworn that his brain was fried at what he heard. His expression must have shown so, because the other two shared a good laugh at him. He shook his head to regain his composure and remembered that these guys hadn't introduced themselves yet. "Excuse me, sir," he said politely, gaining their attention and reducing their laughter to quiet chuckles. "I still don't know your names." "Oh. How rude of me to forget my manners." The man chuckled as he rubbed the back of his head in an attempt to express the minor embarrassment he felt. "I'm Azazel, and this guy," the now introduced Azazel, gestured at the nonchalantly waving boy who was smirking at and eyeing the brunette in amusement. "Is Vali." Azazel finished his brief introduction in a jovial manner. Issei just barely held himself back from sighing in frustration. Or defeat. Or both. Right before him, it was the leader of the fallen angels and Albion's host. Could this meeting get any worse? "Oh. My full name is Vali Lucifer, by the way." Vali introduced himself calmly, his expression not changing in the slightest. Issei felt like facepalming and screamed at the world in frustration. "I think I'll have that drink now, Azazel-san." He deadpanned at his client, hiding his emotions about the situation he found himself in. "That's the spirit, lad." Azazel cheered with a jovial grin before he poured a glass of what seemed to be an expensive whiskey and handed it to the brunette. Issei eyed the drink in contemplation and, much to the surprise of both Azazel and Vali, he downed it in one go. "How that tasted nice." He muttered in pleasant surprise. Internally, he wondered why he didn't feel any effects from the strong drink. "You can't get drunk, partner. My influence and your dragon-slaying powers prevent you from that." Drake supplied helpfully from inside his head. Great Issei sighed in dejection at the information. "Now I can become an alcoholic and not even be affected by it." "Do you want some more, Haidu-san?" Azazel asked him curiously, yet equally amused, noting in his mind that the brunette didn't even seem tipsy. Issei eyed his client and the silver-haired boy, both of whom were smirking at him in amusement, before focusing on the older man in the room. "Yes, please, Azazel-san." He nodded at his client in confirmation. "And call me Issei, Rias. After all, I'm not one for formalities." He added as an afterthought. "Okay, Ice." Azazel's grin turned to a friendly smile, glad that the brunette seemed to relax in their presence as he poured another glass of whiskey. Issei took a small sip of his drink as he relaxed on the couch before he spoke. "So, what is it that you want from me, Azazel-san?" he asked conversationally. "Didn't I tell you already?" Azazel blinked in surprise. At the brunette's questioning look, he sighed in exasperation. "I just wanted a drinking buddy for tonight and hopefully some more times in the future," he said as if it was obvious. "This time?" Issei blinked in confusion. "That's all." "Yes." The older man confirmed with an amused nod of his head before he sipped from his own drink. Issei sent a look at Vali for clarification. "Don't look at me." Vali chuckled in amusement. "Azazel is way more laid back than he seems." Azazel ignored the jab at his integrity, if his amused laugh was any indication. "Yes. Even my subordinates can attest to that." Issei could only look at the both of them in confusion as they laughed at what seemed to be an inside joke. Nonetheless, he was internally glad that these two didn't mean any trouble. At least, on the surface, as far as the brunette could tell. "So, Ice, tell me how Raynare is doing these days." Azazel said conversationally after he calmed down from his laughter, sombering the joyful mood a little. "She's fine and safe at my house, protecting my parents in my absence, Azazel-san. My mother is teaching her all about housekeeping." Issei replied casually, knowing that the fallen angel before him was worried about Raynare, even if he didn't show it. "Is that so?" Azazel chuckled in amusement, the brunette catching on to the relief in the older man's eyes. "Last time I saw her, she was barely able to fend for herself. You'd be surprised how great of a teacher my mother is in that particular department." Seriously, if Akeno didn't have the appearance and mannerisms of an ideal Yamato Nadeshiko, Issei was pretty sure his mother would be the #1 candidate in Japan for the title. Then, your mother must be a great housewife. Azazel said honestly, nodding at his own words in certainty. She is. Issei confirmed with a matching nod and a soft fond smile. And she has made it her life goal to have as many of my grandchildren from Raynare and Asia-chan as possible, as soon as possible. He added with a deadpan. BFFFFT. Ha. Obviously, Azazel and Volley were more than amused by the brunette's words, if their heartfelt laughter after an impressive spit take was any indication. Issei could only watch in self-depression that his domestic life was being laughed at. Once the laughter died down, Azazel tried not to start laughing again at the brunette's comically depressed anime tears and the fact that the latter was sulking on the couch like a petulant child. Why are you so down about it? Volley asked in genuine curiosity. Others would kill to be in your place. He didn't mention that he would be one of those people, of course. Issei returned from his anime-like depressed state and his expression turned slightly serious, sombering the mood even more. I'm not ready for that kind of relationship yet. After all, I'm still trying to get a hang of the supernatural world. It has been a hectic week for me in a situation that I'm sure hasn't ended yet. It just paused and will restart at a later time. Not knowing when, though. Then, just after a peaceful week, I'm in the presence of the leader of the fallen angels and a descendant of the original Lucifer, who, as strange as it sounds, is Albion's host. So, forgive me if I don't care about banging a hot fallen angel and a cute ex-nun who wants my genes as bad as my mother wants grandchildren. At least, for the time being. He ranted in visible frustration, not being able to hold back the sarcasm at the end of his rant as he looked at the both of them. While the two found his rant interesting, they focused on one detail. So, you were able to pick up on Volley's sacred gear, eh? Azazel asked in equal parts of curiosity and seriousness. Greg did. Issei easily admitted without a shred of shame. He warned me about Albion's presence right before I entered the house. Figures. Volley muttered under his breath with a dejected sigh. I just wanted to meet my rival in peace, and Azazel suggested that this was the best way. He explained the reason for his presence. A little late, in Issei's humble opinion. But, he guessed, better late than never. That's true. Azazel confirmed Volley's claim with a nod of his head, his expression turning serious. I didn't want the devils of this area to know about Volley just yet. And, if possible, I know, we would like his identity to remain a secret for the time being. Even if it sounded like a request, Issei knew that it wasn't one. Okay. He agreed. After all, he knew that both Rias and Sona would raise hell, most likely literally, if they learned about Volley. What about you, then, Azazel-san? You know that Rias-san and Sona-san won't take your presence here lightly. He wondered. Which is why you'll tell the Grimory girl that you met some higher up from the supernatural and just had a drinking night, which is the truth, even if partially, should she ask about our meeting. Both devil girls aren't ready for what's coming, which is why I wanted to meet you so early. Azazel explained in a serious tone. The last bit had Issei on alert. What's coming, then? And when? He basically demanded. The when, Volley interjected, being serious himself. Is something that we don't know just yet, but probably not in the immediate future. However, the first part is more like as to who than what is coming. It's a subordinate of mine, whom you might have heard about in the Bible. Azazel spoke right when Issei was about to ask who the person was. It's Kakabiel, a cadre-class fallen angel that survived the Great War between the three factions of the Christian religion. He's also partially responsible for the mess you found yourself in last week. He was the one to alternate my orders about you and Asia Argento, as well as being suspicious of Raynare, thus making her a loose end to be tied. He explained. Despite the huge bomb that the fallen angel leader dropped on his ass, Issei remained calm and collected, assured by Volley's words that apparently Kakabiel would take some time before he ended up in Kuo. You're right. Rias-san and Sona-san aren't ready for a being of that caliber. Issei agreed with a serious nod. And that's where you and Volley come in. Azazel continued as if the brunette hadn't even spoken. When Kakabiel arrives in Kuo, he'll most likely go after the two devil heiresses, who are related to two of the four Mao. He dropped another bomb that Issei was unaware of. Ignoring the brunette's surprised expression, he spoke again. When Kakabiel reveals his plans, you, Ice, have the power to stop him before he causes any damage. Then, Volley will come and collect him in my place in order for me to punish him. He finished his thorough explanation. Issei had recovered from the shocking revelation that both Rias and Sona were siblings to the freaking Mao, trying to figure out why Azazel was telling him all this. In the end, he couldn't find a reason. Why are you telling me all this, Azazel-san? he asked apprehensively, his suspicion obvious from his expression. Because Volley spoke seriously, gaining the brunette's attention. Even if the Grigori in general have an idea as to what Kakabiel is planning, it's just that, an idea. Until he reveals his true reason, no one in the supernatural world, especially the Grigori, can have a plausible reason to stop Kakabiel. You and me, however, being the hosts of the heavenly dragons, we don't need a reason. We can just act on our own accord. No matter that you're contracted to the Grimoire and me being the adoptive son of Azazel. That's just to show how much influence we have in the supernatural world. Or, in this case, in the Christian pantheon. He explained. Inwardly, Issei was both awed and surprised about the last bit. That said, he was still confused. Seeing the brunette's expression, Azazel decided to take it easy with the bombs for one night. You don't need to worry too much, Ice. After all, as Volley said earlier, it'll take some time for Kakabiel to act. He reassured the brunette with a smile that matched his tone. There is a more pressing matter to worry about that will come around the corner very soon. Volley said, still being serious. Which is? Issei asked in trepidation. He didn't think that he could handle another figurative bomb for the night. Rias Grimoire's fiancé. Both his and the girl's family are pressing for the union as soon as possible. Volley revealed nonchalantly. Not even a second passed from Volley's revelation when a strange tension engulfed the room. Issei's expression had turned emotionless, most likely because his brain was fried for the second time during his visit. In a very calm way that Azazel internally approved of, the brunette took the whole bottle of whiskey from the coffee table and, after he unplugged it, he started chugging it down without stopping. Both Volley and Azazel had huge sweat drops on the back of their heads at what they were witnessing, with the latter chuckling awkwardly at the sight of the sécurité trying to get plastered. Volley, I think you broke him. Issei woke up the next day with a thoughtful expression on his face after blinking the sleep out of his eyes, having slept for just 3 hours. He was more than a little grateful that his two tenants showed some mercy and refrained from sparring with him, giving him a day off. In their words, his state of mind wasn't one for a deadly battle. So, they opted to discuss what was said at Azazel's house. After the last figurative bomb that Volley had dropped, it took the brunette a couple of bottles, more than the first one, to regain his composure and start talking again. On a side note, neither Azazel nor Volley questioned his sober state after drinking 3 whole bottles of whiskey, even if they were more than curious about that fact. When the conversation restarted, Issei learned that Ria's fiancé was a guy named Razor Phoenix. Not very much was known about him, since he was a devil, but there were 3 facts that the whole supernatural world knew about, for both Razor and the Phoenix clan in general. 1. Razor was a complete douchebag that represented one of the many bad sides of the devil race in general. 2. He had the ability to instantly regenerate from all kinds of wounds, as long as they weren't of holy nature, and he had the demonic power to do so. 3. He had control over the elements of fire and wind. In layman's terms, Razor and his whole clan had the regenerative ability and the control of fire and wind of the legendary bird, Phoenix. Issei did a really good job at hiding his excitement at finally getting his personal punching bag upon hearing that, since it seemed that both the Grimoire and the Phoenix households were trying to press the arranged marriage between Rias and Razor to as soon as possible. He couldn't hide it in front of Drake and Zangetsu, though. Not that either of the two minded. In fact, the Sword Spirit and the Heavenly Dragon welcomed the prospect of a challenge. Issei was smart enough to deduce that it would come down to a rating game between Rias and Razor's peerages, since the redeed, according to Azazel, was against the arranged marriage. And, since devils were prone to use the rating games for situations like these, aside from their own entertainment, the brunette was pretty sure his deduction would come to fruition. On another note, Drake explained to Issei why Azazel couldn't interfere himself with Kakabiel more than suspicious movements. Apparently, the fallen angel leader's mere presence in Kuo could cause a conflict between devils and fallen angels, which would result in a full-scale war for the two races. Something that, in Drake's words, could be Kakabiel's ultimate goal. Issei and Zangetsu easily agreed on that. The brunette forced himself out of his thoughts by turning to see his alarm clock. Since it was a school day, he didn't want to be late for school. Otherwise, he would have to meet Sona, and he didn't want that to happen, yet. Even if she had gained his interest by how intellectual she seemed, she had forced buried memories and feelings on the surface with that question. Issei got up from the bed and immediately got his uniform on, since he had a shower once he returned from Azazel's. Thankfully, he had been quiet enough to not wake up the rest of the residents in his home. Forcing all of his thoughts to the back of his mind, the brunette opened his door, a school bag on his right shoulder, ready to have breakfast with his family. He wasn't surprised that he came face to face with a mischievously smiling Raynare, clad in a plain white apron over her casual clothing, carrying the scent of the food she had helped his mother to make. What did surprise him, however, was that she leaned in and softly kissed his left cheek. Her mischievous expression didn't change when she returned to her earlier posture as she greeted him softly. "Good morning, Isay-kun." With that, without waiting for a response, she descended the stairs with a visible pep in her steps. Issei just stood there, dumbfounded at what had just happened. His two tenants' uproarious laughter at his state in his head brought him out of his jumbled thoughts. He shook his head a couple of times and his expression turned a little sad. Yes, he would be lying if he wasn't attracted to Raynare and even Asia, but, just as he had told Azazel and Volley last night, it wasn't the right time to make a move on either of them. Not to mention Rias, Akeno and Sona. He would be the greatest liar if he denied that they were, at the very least, beautiful and attractive, each one in their own right. With a dejected sigh, the brunette descended the stairs to join the rest on the table for breakfast. He couldn't help but sweat drop at the sight of his mother giving an approving pat on Raynare's head with a matching smile, before trying to motivate the teary-eyed, cutely pouting Asia to have the same confidence as the female fallen angel. All the while his father was reading his newspaper and sipped his coffee, ignoring the morning's liveliness. Issei refrained from sighing in exasperation. He just knew that something like what happened with Raynare would be a common occasion in the future, immediate or not. Hopefully, Rias wouldn't ask for details about his contract. Speaking of which, it was a success, all things considered. Azazel gave him a bottle of whiskey as a payment for his services, thus signing their contract. Also, the fallen angel leader had written a recommendation, which he put in an envelope for Issei to give to Rias. The day passed relatively quickly, with both Asia and Issei finding themselves in the orc, where everyone else did their usual thing. "Hello, Isay-kun, Asia-chan." Akeno greeted them in Ria's stead, smiling kindly. Biba, wearing a matching smile with the queen, waved at them from the couch he shared with Kaneko, who just nodded at them and returned to her sweets. "Hello, everyone." Asia greeted them cheerfully, albeit warmly. "Yo." Was Issei's simple greeting, although he wore a soft, yet warm smile on his face. Even Rias, who was still immersed in her paperwork, smiled at their warm greeting. Akeno's and Kiba's smiles widened a fraction, seeing their two latest members becoming close to them. Just like a big family. Asia and Issei took their seats on the free couch, with the blonde sitting closer to Ria's desk and the brunette close to her. Akeno served them some tea, for which she was thanked warmly by both of them, which, in turn, made her kind smile widen even more. Just as the two sipped from their cups, Rias finished her paperwork and raised her head. She hid her jealousy at Asia's closeness to the brunette behind a mask of kindness. Iridide was about to announce something before she saw her contracted magician turn to look curiously at the door. "What is it, Ice?" she asked, matching his sentiment. Issei turned to her, his curious expression not leaving his face as he responded with a question of his own. "Why is Sona-san and her entire peerage coming here?" Asia perked up at that as she looked at him in wonder. "Really, Sona Kaichu is coming?" Before Issei could confirm that, Rias beat him to it. "Yes, Asia-chan," she said, gaining the attention of the room. "Sona is coming, probably to discuss something that I was about to tell you," she explained, her tone a weird combination of motherly and businesslike. She had grabbed Issei's interest with her words. That said, he had a small business to finish off from last night. He gained the attention of the room when he stood up and, without saying a word or making a sound, he went to Ria's desk and placed the envelope Azazel had given him. He didn't respond to her questioning look. He just gave her a small smile and returned to his seat, raising the curiosity of everyone that wasn't Kaneko. Rias just opened the envelope and took the small letter from inside. She and Akeno, who was slightly behind her, read the letter and their eyes widened in both recognition and realization. Despite her curiosity as to who was Issei's client was growing, Rias refrained from asking him. If it was someone important or dangerous, she had faith in her magician that he would have told her immediately. Instead, she purposefully focused on the praising words Issei's client had written for the brunette. "Good job, Ice." Rias praised him with a genuinely proud and kind smile. "Congratulations for your first contract and your client's recommendation. Color me impressed, Ice-kun." Kiba gave his own praise, his perpetual smile widened a little at the genuinity of his words. Issei decided to take that as a compliment instead of the underlined "I didn't think you could do it" message. Rara Ice-kun seems to be a natural at completing contracts like a devil. Akeno praised him as well, visibly genuine in her words, her teasing nature nowhere to be seen. "That's amazing, Ai-san." Asia's excited and amazed comment was next, wearing a mixed look of adoration and awe. "Good job." Kaneko was as emotionless as ever when she spoke before she returned to her sweets. Issei's smile widened, feeling a pang of pride at being praised by people so genuinely. People that weren't his parents, that is. Or Rin. Thanks, everyone. He said softly, his being filled with a familiar warmth that he had almost forgotten how it felt since Rin moved away. The joyful mood was somewhat ruined when the door was knocked lightly. Everybody in the orc schooled their features, knowing who was on the other side of the door. Rias cleared her throat before giving her permission for entrance in a business-like tone. Enter. Both doors opened a second later, revealing Sona and her peerage, with the student council president taking the lead. Tsubaki was a step behind her and to her left, with the rest a couple more steps behind. Good evening, everyone. Sona greeted the residents in the orc in her usual tone, her eyes meeting everyone's, but lingered just a second more on the brunette in the room, before, finally, locking gazes with her childhood friend. Then, she entered the room, followed by her peerage. Good evening to you too. Rias greeted back in a matching tone, her eyes leaving her rivals, for a moment, to meet the latter's peerage redeed, ignored the males from Sona's side blatant ogling for herself, as well as the rest of the girls that were members of the orc. To what do we owe the presence of the student council in this fine evening? She asked formally. Sona fixed her glasses before she spoke. In 3 days' time, it will be this month's full moon. I am aware of that, Sona. Rias confirmed the brunette's claim with a serious nod. I was about to inform my peerage about this, but Ice informed me of your visit. She explained, knowing that Sona was more than smart enough to know this on her own. Am I to assume that you have the same idea as myself? She asked conversationally, already knowing the answer. Correct. Sona confirmed with a serious nod of her own, fixing her glasses again. Upon seeing Asia's cutely clueless expression from the corner of her eye, Rias spoke to Sona. Would you like me to explain, Sona? She asked her friend in a formally kind tone. At the latter's nod of confirmation, the redeed turned to Asia, noticing that Issei was interested in what she was about to say as well. As you know, devils are the only supernatural beings that can form bonds with familiars. Apart from magicians, that is. That said, this can only happen once a month when the human world experiences a full moon. Also, only one high-class devil and their peerage can go to the familiar forest to find familiars for the members that lack the possession of one. She explained thoroughly in a lecturing tone. After a moment of silence, when Issei used his mind to digest the redeed's words, he spoke. So, what you're saying is, since both yourself and Sona-san have new members in your peerages, there has to be a decision as to who will go to this familiar forest. He easily deduced, speaking analytically as he looked only at Rias. Both devil peerages noticed that detail, but didn't comment on it. Although Saji seemed ready to pounce on the brunette in anger at the disrespect shown to his king, he held himself back from a warning look said King gave him. Yes. Rias confirmed his assumption with a nod and an appraising smile, proud that she had contracted a clever person as her magician. Seeing the brunette nodding gratefully at her and leaning back to relax, she turned her gaze at a rival, who was, as always, almost as expressionless as her rook. So, Sona, what do you have in mind? She asked conversationally. Clearly, the student council president had thought about that beforehand because she answered immediately. I have thought of something like a rating game between our clubs, albeit change to our situation as students. Rias momentarily frowned at the mere mention of a rating game, but quickly caught on to Sona's suggestion. So, a competition in sports? She asked for confirmation, if nothing else. Her question visibly piqued the interest of her peerage members, including Issei and Kaneko, everyone wanting in on whatever the two kings decided. Exactly. Sona confirmed as she fixed her glasses, ignoring the visible excitement from the members of the orc, including her childhood friend and rival. I was thinking about an exhibition tennis match, with the kings and our queens to participate. The winner earns the right to go to the familiar forest. However, should the match end in a draw, we will decide on another sport. She suggested professionally. Rias smirked competitively, albeit confidently at her longtime friend and rival, as she leaned back on her chair and crossed her arms under her breasts, as well as her right leg over her left. Internally, she smirked victoriously at the sight of a minuscule twitching of Sona's eyebrow due to the latter's insecurity about her lack in the breast department. Very well, challenge accepted. She responded, not even 2 seconds passing after Sona's proposition. I am glad to hear that, Rias. Sona replied in kind, mimicking her friend's expression. A friendly tension appeared in the air, with Rias and Akeno looking at Sona and Tsubaki respectively in anticipation, with the latter two responding in kind. A few seconds passed before the tension disappeared as if it wasn't there in the first place. How about we let our new members introduce themselves properly, Sona? Rias suggested conversationally as soon as the tension vanished. Yes. Sona agreed immediately, a rare small smile on her lips. This is a good opportunity for our peerages to interact with and get to know each other. Even though she said that, Sona felt ashamed that her peerage made a visible effort to have as less of a contact with Issei as possible due to their fear of him after the events at the church. Apart from Saji, who put up a bravado at the fact that he had consumed 4 of Sona's pawn evil pieces. Much to Sona's inner curiosity and gratefulness, Issei didn't rise to the bait and just congratulated her pawn before going to lean beside the window, leaving free space for everyone else to interact. Rias noticed that detail and felt sad, but knew she couldn't do anything, which added in her sadness. The Redeed could see it was the same with her childhood friend and rival. Even though Sona's expression was as stoic as usual, her eyes expressed the same sentiments Rias felt. And, thus, the meeting concluded in the same way it started. Peacefully. The competition between Rias and Sun ended with the former's victory. Not in the tennis match, though. That ended in a draw. Issei, along with Kiba, couldn't help but sweat drop when the 2 heiresses and their respective queens started to use magic in a tennis match. In front of the whole student body, no less. Miraculously, the students were none the wiser about the supernatural abilities of Rias, Sona, Akeno and Tsubaki. They just took it in stride and cheered them on, with Saji leading those who supported Sona and the perverted duo, those who supported Rias. Then, since there was no winner, the heiresses decided to settle the competition in a dodgeball match, with the location being the school's gym. Again, in front of the whole student body. This time, however, all the members from the student council and the orc were to participate. Though, since the numbers were uneven, Momo Hanakai was assigned as the referee of the match. Issei had tried not to use any more force and abilities than necessary, but when Sona and her peerage started using magic, he decided the opposite. Especially since Saji took out Kiba, who tried to protect Asia in the brunette's stead, as the latter was preoccupied with Tsubasa Yura and Meguri Tomo, by hitting the Prince of Kuo straight at the crotch. As Saji had basked in his accomplishment, Kaneko used the opportunity to pay him back in the same way, using her superior strength as a rook. Even Issei couldn't help but wince in both cases, matching the expression of every guy in the spectating crowd. Anyhow, Rias and her team won, since the Redeed, along with Issei and Akeno, were left against Sona and Tsubaki. So, in the end, it was decided that Rias, her peerage and her contracted magician, would go to the familiar forest on this full moon, while Sona would go on the next one. With only 1 day away from the trip to the familiar forest, Issei decided that it would be a good idea to meet Azazel again. Thankfully, the fallen angel leader sent him a request through the Redeed. Issei was curious as to why Azazel wanted to meet each other on the river bank. Once he got there, he noticed 2 things. 1, Volley wasn't there. 2, the governor of the fallen angels was already in the process of fishing, while he had prepared a similar rod for the brunette to do the same thing. A relatively big bucket was in the middle, probably to put the fish they would catch in there. The Sekiryuite sat cross-legged and caught the rod, while Azazel hummed in approval. "Hello to you too, Ice." The leader greeted with equal amounts of sarcasm and nonchalance. "Why fishing?" Issei asked conversationally, ignoring the greeting he got. Azazel wasn't offended by being ignored. "To save my stash of expensive drinks, of course," he said as if it was obvious. Issei sweat-dropped at the response, but he couldn't argue against it. So, he scratched the back of his head in a sheepish manner with his right hand before bringing it back to hold the fishing rod. "Sorry about that, by the way." He apologized sheepishly, not looking at the fallen angel. "Nah, it's fine." Azazel waved off the apology. "Drinks are for drinking. That's why I'll call you for a drink whenever I'm in the mood for that again." "Good to know that you enjoy my company," Issei said sarcastically. "Believe it or not, I enjoy yours and Volley's company way more than that of my subordinates. You're the only people to treat me normally." Azazel replied honestly. "I thought that you enjoyed being a leader," the brunette said skeptically, turning his head to face the 2-toned-haired man with a raised eyebrow. Azazel shrugged carelessly. "It's true that I enjoyed it back in the day, but the militaristic way gets old really fast and my people fear me more than they respect me. That, or just ignore me. Nowadays, I'm more interested in sacred gear research and maintaining peace between my peers and the other 2 factions. After all, if another war broke out, all of us would be exterminated, which is something that benefits no one in the long run," he explained, sounding equally serious and laid back as his gaze looked a little far away. "True." Issei agreed, ignoring the tugs he felt from his rod as he continued to look at the man beside him. "So, where's Volley?" he asked curiously. Azazel sighed in exasperation before he replied in the same sentiment. "That battlemaniac is probably fighting someone, somewhere." "Battlemaniac?" Issei focused on that word out of interest. "Yeah." Azazel nodded with a fond smile, his head turning to face the brunette for the first time as he continued. Vali is a battle junkie. He likes fighting strong opponents in order to become stronger himself, just for the fun of it. He explained before his gaze turned to the river. At least, he isn't a warmonger like Kakabiel. That boy just enjoys life by challenging strong individuals like you and me. He added as an afterthought. So, I guess he'll challenge me once the mess with Kakabiel is over and done with. If anything, Issei asked for confirmation. Probably. Azazel said, sounding a little vague. Issei turned his head to focus on his rod, which had stopped tugging a couple of seconds ago. With a mighty tug of his own, a small dead fish came straight in the bucket, joining two similar ones that the fallen angel had caught before the brunette joined him in this endeavor. The brunette didn't mind that Vali would challenge him in the future. It would be a good experience to spar against a hacker Yuku instead of Drag and Zangetsu. A few moments of comfortable silence passed before Azazel started the conversation anew. So, what are you up to these days? He asked normally. Issei shrugged nonchalantly as he spoke. Nothing much. Rias-san and Sona-san had a competition as to who between the two of them would go to the familiar forest. Rias-san won, so tomorrow night we'll go there. So, I guess, me and Asia-chan will have a chance to get a familiar. He said, pausing for a moment to think of anything else. Other than that, Rias-san and Sona-san are oblivious to your presence in Kuo. As strange as it seems, Rias-san didn't even question me about our first meeting, nor did she do so tonight. He added as an afterthought, sounding a little curious as to why the Redi didn't pry for just a bit of information. I assumed so. Azazel hummed in thought, gaining the brunette's attention. The Gremory and Citri girls are kind enough to let their subordinates have some privacy. The former more so than the latter. And, in your case, neither could probe for more information, since you're somewhat independent, with you being a contracted magician and not a peerage member. Issei couldn't argue about what he said for Rias and Sona's difference, since he had seen it firsthand. As for the familiar forest part, Azazel continued, sounding intrigued. You'll be the first Seker-Yuete in history to possess one, should it happen. He smirked as he turned to face the brunette. And? Issei sounded uncaring, looking at the river. It's not something that I should be proud of. Even Drake would back me up on this. A confirming grunt in his head was the dragon's answer. He's humble. Probably confident in his power too, considering he's willing to take on Kakabiel. Not arrogant though, which is a good thing. Shows that his head and heart are in the right place. Azazel thought silently in approval and a matching smile, returning his gaze at the river. Another comfortable silence passed before, this time, it was broken by the brunette. How did you know I was Drake's wielder? When I told you about him, neither you nor Vali did seem surprised. Issei asked conversationally, his point leaving no room for the fallen angel to avoid an answer. Vali told me. Azazel replied lamely. Feeling a pair of questioning eyes on him, he elaborated in a thorough manner. Last year, when you awakened Drake, apart from the devils in Kuo, Vali was the only one to sense the Red Dragon Emperor's power. Throughout the years, the hosts of the two heavenly dragons were able to find each other through just instinct, so it made sense to me that Vali was able to sense you. Then, you went off the grid for a year, for which I was curious about. For all I knew, you could be a serious threat to everyone, not just us fallen angels, thus making Raynare monitor you and report to me. We both know how that went, so I'll skip the details. Anyway, so, when you dealt with Donasik at the church, both me and Vali, along with the supernatural beings in Kuo, felt you reaching balance breaker. That said, I can't figure out why we felt it, since there was a barrier around the church, but I don't care for such a small detail. Issei could tell that the governor was honest with his words, but also seemed to want to say more on the subject. I get all that, but you seem troubled about something. He probed politely, even if he was curious as to how the entirety of Kuo felt his power while he was inside a barrier. Azazel sighed in defeat at being read like a book by a teenager. And it wasn't the first time. He must be getting too old for this shit. That night, you released a level of bloodlust that had me and Vali on edge, ice. Not to mention how the rest of the supernatural beings in Kuo were affected by it. They will probably fear you instinctively, just by looking at you. He explained, his nonchalant tone hiding the worry he felt on the matter. Bloodlust? Issei asked in genuine confusion as he looked at the taller man. At the latter's nod, he shook his head in dejection before he returned his gaze at the river, his eyes expressing mental tiredness. That wasn't bloodlust you felt, Azazel-san. That was my sword's aura that has a similar feeling to bloodlust, even if it's completely different. At night, I released a true form of the sword by releasing a high amount of power. That power was so highly condensed and potent that it felt like I was a very bloodthirsty dragon, ready to kill everything on sight. It's somewhat true, since I went after Issei can made him almost bleed to death 10 times over. But, again, it wasn't bloodlust what you felt. It was just the power I used for releasing my sword's true form. He explained thoroughly in a sad tone, having taken seriously his companion's words that others would fear him even more. Which, in his mind, included Kiba, Asia, Raynare and the rest of the orc, or even Sona and her peerage. Which might have explained why the latter's peerage kept their interactions with him to a minimum. And, in the worst case scenario, Rin and his parents would fear him as well. Just the thought of his childhood friend turning her back on him out of fear sent an unpleasant chill down his spine. Not to mention his parents, the thought alone made him want to perform seppuku suicide by sword. He was tired of feeling alone. The fallen angel governor noticed that he, unintentionally, completely ruined his companion's mood. He refrained from sighing in self-frustration. Instead, he used his mind to find a way to distract the brunette from his current state. Issei felt a tug on his rod and he immediately reared it back a little powerfully, albeit absent-mindedly. Azazel raised an impressed eyebrow that the brunette caught a fish as big as the taller man's forearm. Something that could also be used as a solid distraction. "Nice catch, kid," he said, impressed as he looked at the big fish in the bucket. Unfortunately, it didn't work since the brunette still seemed gloomy as hell. The fallen angel leader wanted to scream at his siblings in heaven in frustration. What was it with both heavenly dragons of this generation to be mentally unstable, for one reason or another? He had already dealt with one heavenly dragon, he didn't want to deal with the other's problems as well. "Look, Ice." He started seriously as he looked at the brunette, who just hummed absent-mindedly. "I said, look at me," he demanded. Hearing the power through Azazel's words, the brunette did so, although his sad expression didn't change. "You don't need to feel so down about this. If you're worried about your new friends fearing you, you just have to explain the nature of your sword's power to them, just like you did with me a few moments ago. That way, they'll understand and not get caught off guard the next time you use your sword. If they still fear you, then it'll be because you're stronger than them and they'll have a hard time reaching your level of power. So, that fear will become a competitive spirit in the future. Especially when they encounter stronger opponents than themselves. And that includes even myself and Volley, not just the Gremory and Citri girls and their peerages." He advised in a fatherly tone, being thorough in his explanation, wanting to get in the brunette's head when it was still early. Azazel almost sighed in relief upon seeing his companion smiling softly at no one in particular, meaning that his advice was heard and taken to heart. "Thanks, Azazel-san. I appreciate your words." Issei responded kindly. "Don't mention it, kid." Azazel scoffed in a dismissive way. A compassionate silence fell over them for a couple of moments, with both parties enjoying it as they each pulled out a small fish from the river. So, Issei broke the silence, earning the fallen angel's attention. "Why did Volley tell me about Razor Phoenix?" he asked curiously. "If I had to guess," Azazel said thoughtfully, showing that he didn't know either. "It's probably because it'll come down to a rating game between the two heirs." "My thoughts exactly." Issei confirmed the taller man's assumption with a nod of his head. "But, that doesn't explain Volley's reason for telling me," he stressed. "If I know Surzich's Lucifer well, then our assumption will come to fruition. So, the oncoming rating game will be shown to the high-class society in the underworld, which includes the high-ranking fallen angels in Grigori, along with myself. That said, Volley will watch the rating game and will decide if you're worthy of being his opponent in the near future." Azazel explained analytically. "It sounds like something Volley would do, according to what I know about him through you." Issei nodded in understanding. "That, however, doesn't explain why me and Asia-chan didn't know about Rias' fiancé in the first place. Why didn't she tell us about Razor Phoenix?" he wondered. "Probably because she thinks she can undo the contract between the two households, which makes her both stupidly overconfident and childishly naive, trying to solve the problem by herself, using you and Asia Argento as her aces, should things not go her way." Azazel deadpanned with a sigh. "That makes sense." Issei agreed with his own sigh. From what he had seen with his own eyes, the fallen angel's words were absolutely true. Which begged the question, how much did the governor know about the whole supernatural world, including Issei himself? "It's getting late, kid. And you have school tomorrow. Not to mention the visit to the familiar forest at night." Issei smiled at Azazel's way of trying to show care and be dismissive about it at the same time. "Good night to you too, Azazel-san," he said kindly with a matching bow of his head as he stood up. Seeing the brunette leaving without the bucket while also noticing the lack of sound, Azazel spoke. "What about your payment, Ice?" he asked curiously. The Sekiryuite didn't stop walking as he answered in a polite yet dismissive tone. "Your pep talk was more than enough payment, Azazel-san, which is something I thank you for." You can keep the fish to cook whenever we drink again at your house." Azazel couldn't contain his heartfelt laughter at those words. He was right. This generation's heavenly dragons were as stable as the sea's fire between the three factions, but their hearts and brains were in the right places. Especially the Secretary. The brunette, in Azazel's mind, had more potential to change the world for the better than his adoptive son. When he was certain that Issei had exited his barrier, Azazel spoke joyfully to himself. "Ice, you're gonna be a man amongst men. And I sense a great friendship between us in the future." While Asia was trembling in excitement about the trip to the familiar forest, Issei was equally indifferent. After all, the brunette didn't expect that he would find a useful creature to spend the rest of his life with. Nor did he expect to find a creature willing to do that in the first place. Not to mention that he didn't think he would need one. His indifference turned to dread when a teasingly smirking Rias urged him to get into the transportation magic circle. The brunette considered, for just a moment, to not go with them. The cute teary pleading look from Asia and the matching pout from Rias told him to think again about his next action. Bakendo's teasing giggles and Kiba's awkward chuckles didn't help in the slightest. Even Kaneko stared at him as if he was an idiot to even consider not following them in a once-in-a-lifetime trip. With a dreary sigh, Issei entered the magic circle. Asia's radiant smile told Issei that maybe, just maybe, this visit to the familiar forest would be worth the trouble for his motion sickness. With a flick of Ria's fingers, the group of 6 vanished from the orc in a crimson glow. As soon as the group resurfaced from the magic circle, Issei tried really hard to keep everything in his stomach. Apart from Asia, who had no idea about his motion sickness, the rest took a small leap away from him, knowing that he was about to blow whatever there was in his stomach. "Isay, are you alright?" Asia asked him worriedly, noticing his distressed state. Issei didn't answer verbally, not trusting himself to speak, lest he vomited on the cute blonde. That said, he shook his head very slowly, looking away from the ex-nun. While Asia started panicking about his state, Kiba decided to be helpful, seeing that the girls from the orc were equally amused and disgusted about the would-be show. "Ice-kun has motion sickness, Asia-chan. He informed me." Asia's panic came to a grinding halt as she made an O. In both recognition and realization, before she used her sacred gear on the now kneeling and ragged-breathing brunette. Not even 2 seconds later, Issei's breathing returned to normal, and he turned his head slightly to the right, where Asia was looking at him in worry. He smiled softly at the blonde. "Thanks, Asia-chan. You're a lifesaver," he said gratefully. Asia blushed cutely in embarrassment as she stammered over her words under his praise. Issei stood up fully, smiling still in place, patting the blonde's head in another gesture of his appreciation for her actions. Poor Asia's face resembled Ria's hair, even as she basked in the warmth the brunette emitted from his hand. Said deed hid her jealousy at the scene under a mask of kindness. Bakendo just giggled in amusement, while Kaneko just turned her gaze away from the two. The white-haired girl didn't want to remember her joyful moments before that person decided to ruin their lives. As for Kiba, his smile matched the soft hue his brunette friend sported. Suddenly, Issei stiffened and his head snapped to their left, making everyone become alert, with Asia clutching on the brunette's hand like a lifeline. "What is it, Ice?" Rias asked him seriously. "Someone's coming this way." Issei responded in kind, his eyes narrowing at the direction he was looking at. At his words, Rias and her peerage, aside from Asia, relaxed their postures. "Ice, the one that's coming is the familiar master, Zataoji's son. He's the one that will help you and Asia-chan to find your familiars," Rias explained with a relaxed smile. Issei blinked in surprise, before he relaxed as well, followed by Asia. Then, both noticed the scenery around them. It was admittedly a creepy-looking forest, with the purple-ish sky from above, making it seem ominous in nature. The trees were tall and thick enough to obscure the view of everybody, casting a pitch-black shadow to the paths in between the trees. Issei thought that it was fitting, considering that it housed creatures for devils and magicians. Also, due to his abilities, he knew where every single creature was, which included some surprising ones, as well as most of their species. "Greg, I didn't know that dragons could become familiars." Issei spoke mentally in wonder to the dragon in his soul. "I didn't know either, partner." Drake replied in a mixture of surprise and distaste. "To think that our kind is used as servants to the devils and, even worse, magicians, makes my blood boil. How the mighty have fallen, indeed," he added with audible anger. Is decided to cut off his internal communication, not wanting to accidentally make Drake even angrier than he already was. He had to agree with his tenant, though. Dragons were supposed to roam free and independent. Not become servants to anyone, even if some supernatural species, devils or otherwise, were stronger than some dragons. His inner turmoil came to a stop when he heard a rustling on the trees close to the group. It seems that this Itachi-san is here, Rias-san. Issei said airily, gesturing with his head at the direction he heard the man coming from. The group heeded his words and faced the same direction, the rustling on the trees being audible to themselves as well, since the familiar master was really close. When he appeared through the leaves of the last tree, seemingly having taken a leap from his last position towards the group, Issei thought that the familiar master's appearance looked like an older version of a certain trainer in a worldwide known anime, where the protagonist seemed to be a 10-year-old boy wearing a red cap in every damn season. Issei quickly noticed that Zatoji was as eccentric as an everyday person, albeit in a weird way. The familiar master talked almost perpetually in rhymes, which got old and annoying real fast for the Sekiryuite. His view for Zatoji took a turn for the worse when the latter tried to pass Issei himself as a familiar for Asia due to the brunettes' nature as the Sekiryuite and the subtle draconic aura he gave off. Even with a huge comical lump on his head from one of Issei's punches, Zatoji didn't stop being himself, despite the anime-like waterfalls that his eyes leaked from the pain. The group was guided through the forest, with Zatoji leading the pack, followed by Rias and Akeno, and the rest were a couple of steps behind. Throughout the trip, Zatoji pestered Asia, without even looking at her, which one of the creatures they encountered on their way to be her familiar, all the while explaining all the creatures' abilities. Asia denied each and every one of them, her reasoning being that the creatures were not cute enough for her taste. Even Issei couldn't help but sweat drop at that, as did the rest of the group, including Zatoji. That said, the brunette could agree that all the creatures, at that point, would be useless for the blonde ex-nun. Especially the undines. Issei hid his great distaste really well for the ugly, yet seemingly strong abominations for water spirits. Somewhere along the way, the familiars of Rias, Akeno, Kaneko and Kiba came to greet their masters, who, in turn, introduced the creatures to Issei and Asia, along with explaining their abilities and the reasons they had them in the first place. Well, Kaneko didn't. She just gave her white cat's name, Shiro. Rias had a cute small black bat that could transform into a cute cosplaying girl. Akeno had 3 different colored onis that refused to be separated from one another, which was why the personification of Yamato Nadeshiko owned all 3. Kiba had a cool-looking falcon. Their abilities weren't all that great, but Issei agreed that the familiars were, at the very least, useful for the 4 devils. Especially for the future raiding games that Rias and her peerage, along with Issei himself, would attend to in the future. The brunette stopped walking when the group entered a small clearing, his head turning upwards and to their left, where he sensed a presence looking down at them. Or, more specifically as he looked more carefully, to the blonde Italian beside him. Probably because of her innate ability as a dragon tamer. Issei thought to himself, noticing that the creature didn't seem to have any malicious intent. "Ai-san." Asia noticed him first and called out to him in a mixture of wonder and surprise before her eyes followed his line of sight. The rest stopped as well, turning to face him out of curiosity. They followed his gaze, and their eyes landed on a peculiar sight. A really small, sea-colored dragon, the size of Issei's entire arm, was using its hind legs to stand on a tree branch. Its wings weren't completely folded, which showed that its underwings, underbelly and undertail were of an ethereal yellow color. Its eyes were a mixture of bluish green and yellow reptilian slits. Its tail was as long as its body, with its wingspan seemingly reaching the same length. While its eyes categorized it as cute, it was just as magnificent at such a close range. "OHOA baby Sprite dragon. An extremely rare species for a familiar," Zatoji exclaimed in intrigue. "Its electrical charges are really powerful, even at its early age. Once it matures, it will be almost as powerful as a high-class dragon," he explained in animated excitement. On a side note, he refrained from using rhymes, lest he was rewarded another concussion-inducing punch from the Sekiryuite. "Raufufu, it's a cute little thing, for a rare dragon." Akeno giggled behind a delicate hand, liking what she saw. "Can't argue with Akeno-chan. It's really cute." Kiba agreed with his queen, his kind smile widening a little at the sight of the small dragon. Kaneko didn't say a word. Her lips twitched upwards in a faint smile, and her eyes showed how much she liked what she was seeing, in a very rare case at breaking her expressionless facade. Ria's smile and gaze indicated that she agreed with her queen and knight as well. Her eyes searched for her 2 newest members, wanting to see their reactions. She almost giggled at Asia's cutely entranced gaze. When she looked at Issei, however, she couldn't stop the chill that ran down her spine at the intensity he emitted from his calm gaze. Neither the faint blush on her cheeks, nor the warmth in her lower half of her body. What no one didn't know was that Issei felt like he could hear the baby dragon's thoughts, which was why he was staring at it with such intensity, yet with a calm expression. He didn't know why that was the case, but chalked it up to one of his abilities. Probably the ones that came in a package with his rubbery powers. Also, probably because he paid attention to the Sprite dragon in the first place. As far as he knew, the baby dragon wanted to come close to Asia but was apprehensive with the rest of the group, including himself. Correction. Mostly himself. Internally, he wondered if he would be able to hear every creature's thoughts should he pay attention to them as well. Something to test at a later time. Because, at this moment, his blonde friend was a few moments away from getting a very useful and powerful familiar. Not to mention willing. Asia-chan. Issei called out softly, not wanting to spook the baby dragon, while also gaining the attention of everyone there, even as his gaze never left dragon. Go ahead and have him as a familiar. He urged his friend calmly. You know it's a he, Ice-kun Kiba was surprised, voicing the question of everybody else. Yeah. The brunette confirmed with a slow nod of his head. And, if you watch carefully, he has his eyes solely on Asia-chan. That tells me his intentions are very clear. He explained softly, his lips turning upwards to a matching smile. The rest of the group did as he instructed and, true to his words, the baby dragon was staring almost longingly at the blonde ex-nun. Said girl smiled radiantly as she noticed the same thing with the others and took several steps towards the Sprite dragon, indicating what her own intentions about said creature were. Seeing the girl coming his way, without anyone else following her, the baby dragon flapped its small wings and flew towards her, meeting each other halfway. The dragon seemed to bask in the incredible feeling the girl emitted as he nuzzled his small cheek with hers, while the girl giggled in delight at his cuteness. Especially since he purred cutely as he was held delicately in the blonde's gentle embrace. I'll call you Issei from now on. Asia announced excitedly. Her response was an approving nod on her cheek as his purrs matched her excitement, making her giggle in even more delight. Bar Issei, Asia-chan. Issei asked in equal amounts of curiosity and amusement as he approached the delighted duo with a soft smile on his face, followed by everyone else. The dragon stopped nuzzling and turned his head to face the brunette. His glare and growls were cute rather than threatening. Don't worry, little guy. Issei said reassuringly as he eyed the baby dragon in amusement, albeit his tone and smile were soft. I'm not gonna harm your new mistress. As a matter of fact, I feel the same way as you about Asia-chan. His words, while visibly relaxed the small dragon, who returned to his previous ministrations, had managed to confuse everyone else. Although, Asia blushed cutely in embarrassment, almost misinterpreting his words for another meaning than the actual one. What did you mean by that, Ice? Rias asked in equal amounts of curiosity and confusion. The brunette used his right index finger to caress the baby dragon's free cheek, making it purr in even more delight at his warmth and even lean a little on his finger, which made his smile widen at the sight. He knew he had everyone's attention on him as he spoke. None of you are aware, but Asia-chan has a very rare innate ability, apart from her twilight healing, which might be amplified because of the sacred gear. He explained a little vaguely. Everyone there frowned in even more confusion and curiosity as they thought about what kind of ability Asia had, with the blonde herself feeling a little lost. Issei caressed the baby dragon's back with his entire hand, its delighted purrs being music to his ears, and his smile widened even more at the sound, as well as the thought that there was someone else that wasn't afraid of him. Even if it wasn't an anthropomorphic species. Believe it or not, Drake has told me that Asia-chan is a dragon tamer. A person with the ability to calm dragons to an unnatural level, and one that said species will risk their life to protect, if needed, with no questions asked. He revealed. Asia, Zatoji, Rias and her peerage widened their eyes in disbelief at the information. Inwardly, they agreed with the fact that it sounded unbelievable. However, upon seeing how the Sprite dragon acted as soon as Asia was close to him, Issei's claim seemed true. And, now that everyone thought about it, Issei was way too calm when around Asia, even when she was killed by Donaseek for her sacred gear. Considering that Issei was the wielder of the boosted gear and, therefore, his being was influenced by that of a dragon, it made sense that the brunette was so calm in Asia's presence. Without any more funfair or unnecessary words, Asia made Issei her familiar in a formal fashion, which was similar to when Rias reincarnated her as a devil. In the end, the group left the familiar forest in a joyful mood, since one of the members earned themselves a powerful familiar. That said, Asia never explained why she named the Sprite dragon Issei to her not-so-secret love interest. As for Issei himself, he was more than content that Asia had gotten herself familiar. So much so, he didn't feel any negative emotions at not getting to know himself. He was pretty sure that there would be another trip to the familiar forest in the near future. So, he would get a second chance, and, hopefully, there would be a creature that he would be interested in. This is the end of the video. If you enjoyed the story, then hit the like button and comment your favorite part, but for now see you all in the next video.